Hello and welcome. I'm Erin Cuthbert, footballer for Chelsea and the Scotland national team, and you're listening to the Blue Day podcast.
Fellow Chelsea supporters, this is the Blue Day podcast and welcome to our Christmas special. I am your host as always, Keith Lawrence, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest on the show today. He made 137 appearances for the club, scoring 43 goals. Plus, he played alongside the likes of Steve Clarke, Erland Johnson and Dennis Wise. Here is John Spencer. John, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Keith. Very well, son. Thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to have you on. You've been one of the players that I've been most looking forward to having on for a while. Obviously, for the '90s era that a lot of Chelsea fans still remember fondly to this day. So it's great. It's great to have you on. I want to start the interview, if I can, by asking about who or what sort of convinced you to become a professional footballer.
Well, I think probably looking back to who convinced me, I think my uncle Colin. He was my mum's brother, and he was an avid football player. And I'm probably very unlucky not to have made it himself into the professional game. Certainly had the talent, but maybe had never had the temperament. He was always wanting to get the fisticuffs out if he was getting bad tackles on the pitch. But he was a super talented player, and obviously he had a massive impact on me as a child. Used to go to the shops with him, used to walk about the streets with him, and he looked after me. So it was probably maybe him that got me started into kicking the ball in and around the streets of the Gorbals in Glasgow.
And in terms of when you sort of got your passion into football, who were your idols growing up as a youngster?
I would say idol, and that number one idol I had was Kenny Dalglish. Big, obviously, he came up through at Celtic, and when I was a youngster at that age, I was a Celtic fan up until 12. When I joined the other side of the city, I joined Rangers. That had to stop. So Kenny Dalglish was my all-time favourite player, and obviously that's why I wore number 7 when I get into the team. I always picked the number 7 jersey, so he was a king.
Now, I want to fast track to the summer of '92. You would end up signing for Chelsea from Rangers for a fee, from what I
Yeah.
looked at the research, was about £450,000. How did this move materialise for you?
Well, what happened is I spent a year in Hong Kong on loan when I was at Rangers. Graham Souness put me out there to get me experience because we had 3 super strikers at the time, Ali McCoy, Maurice Johnson and Mark Haitley in front of me, and I was never ever going to break through. These guys were at the peak of their career. So I went, I spent a year, 1989 to 1990 in Hong Kong, had a brilliant time, really spread my wings as a footballer and in life in general. And did really well, scored a lot of goals, had a fantastic time. And then when I came back to Rangers, I went back into reserve team football. And it was almost like it just wasn't fulfilling enough for me. And I remember it was 2 or 3 games into the season, started ever so well. So I think I scored like 3 in the first game, 4 or 5 in the second game. And I believe that there was a Chelsea scout watching several first team players for Rangers at that time that they were trying to unload or offload, sorry, from the wage bill. And I believe the story goes that this English scout reported back to Chelsea and Ken Bates and said, listen, don't take any of the players that's been mentioned. Take a chance on the young kid Spencer. And that's the story I get told. And then Chelsea made the bid. I wasn't sure it was 450. I thought it was in the kind of a 300 mark. But it happened very quickly where I get called into the office at Rangers with the then manager Walter Smith. And he said to me, listen, we've accepted a bid from Chelsea for you. Who's your agent? I didn't even have an agent at the time because I'd never ever thought about that I was going to leave Rangers anytime soon. So it came about very quickly. I met the agent in London. One of the first team players at Rangers had recommended him. Met him down at Heathrow Airport. And we went out to Bates's farm that night, Grange Farm. Had some ice cream at midnight and did the deal. And the next day I was a Chelsea player.
Not bad to have in terms of sorting out your contract. A little bit of ice cream. That there's plenty of worse things to have.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you I was sitting in a nightclub in London popping champagne. Me and Betsy at that time, it was nice, like me and him and the agent, my father-in-law was there, and as I say, we did the deal very, very quickly.
Hmm.
And I believe myself and Robert Fleck, I think they signed myself, Robert Fleck, and Mick Harford almost in the same night.
Oh, was it that close together then? Because they did sort of sign. It was around about that time as well that they signed. So it was quite close together from when you signed compared to them.
Yeah, definitely. In fact,
Oh, right.
thinking back of it, Mick Harford actually did, myself and Mick actually did the medical the next day after training. We went down and did the medical in London. So yeah, me and Mick and Flecky, I think we signed in this basically the same night. So it was a couple of days before the Premier League season, first Premier League season kicked off. So I think they waited right to the end and they got their business done. Maybe it was a bit late in the day, but it certainly worked out well for myself personally.
Now, Ian Porterfield was the manager at the time. What was your relationship like with him?
Well, it was pretty distant. As I say, I came down from Rangers. I probably wasn't looked at as going to get into the first team with them signing Mick Harford and Robert Fleck. They had, I believe, big Tony Cascarino at the club at the time. I'm trying to think if there was any other forwards, but I was maybe brought in as fourth or fifth choice young player with potential that was going to get into the reserve team and maybe get play maybe a year or so in the reserve team and to see if I would come through. But in my mind, I had kind of other ideas in that. Obviously, playing at Rangers with a squad full of international footballers, I felt that I could hold my own. I felt really confident, and when I looked at the squad of players, I felt that I was going to be knocking on the door very, very soon.
You would go on to make your debut for Chelsea, albeit in a 2-1 defeat to Norwich City early on in the 92-93 season. Do you have any particular memories of your debut for Chelsea? It was albeit from the bench as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Was that the game? I actually thought it might have been Everton at home. That might have been the game that I got my first goal. To be honest with you, if that was my debut, it couldn't have been that good because I can't remember it. But what had happened was I remember picking up an injury very early on. We were doing an afternoon session. There was about five or six of us out in the pitch with Don Howe, and we were doing an afternoon session. I received a ball into feet, and I remember Dave Lee came right through the back of me, and I'll never forget the pain that I had shooting down the back of my leg. So that kind of hampered the first, I would say, 3 or 4 months in my Chelsea career. And but once I got myself fit, remember getting back in the team and near the end of the season and having a good run under Dave Webb.
Just having a look in terms of your first goal. Your first goal for Chelsea was in a 4-2 defeat to Man City, but your first start was against Queen's Park Rangers in the January of '93, which you also scored as well.
Really? Wow. I'll need to look back in that myself. Your stats and your memory might be better than mine, but as I say, I had the first season was very kind of a up and down, and
Hmm.
I came into my own later on in the season when I got myself healthy again.
You talked about David Webb. He took over mid-season from Ian Porterfield. Was you surprised with the change, and what sort of changes did David Webb implement into the team?
Well, I always remember it was. I wouldn't say there was a massive. What was the best way to describe it? I just wouldn't say there was a massive emphasis on coaching and shape, etc. The way there is in today's modern game. So it was more that you were just going out, you would go through the set pieces, etc. And you would play like 11v11, but it wasn't a lot of tactical stuff. When Dave Webb came in, I always remember having a conversation. I think he spoke to most of the players, I would imagine, but my conversation was pretty short and pretty blunt, where Dave Webb said to me that he was never in favour of short, smaller players. He preferred bigger strikers, etc. And I'll never forget the words that he said to me was like, they tell me you're a good finisher, so if you go out there and you get the chance to finish, try and finish your chances and impress me. So I remember playing in a reserve game not too long afterwards, scored a couple of goals, and then I get brought onto the bench for the first team. So I must have done something like right.
Well, when I looked at the stats, you would end up becoming a influential player for Chelsea at the end of that season. You'd come up with vital goals against the likes of Everton, as you mentioned, Middlesbrough, Ipswich, Wimbledon, and Coventry. Was you happy overall with your first season return in terms of goals and also the involvement in the first team?
Yeah, I actually was. As I said to you, there's nothing worse when you go to a new club and the first thing the first thing you do is pick up an injury early on, and then you miss that important part. Because I was flying at Rangers in pre-season, and obviously the Scottish season had started earlier than the English season at that time. So I was, fully fit, and then to pick up that injury so early, it sets you back, and it takes you a good 4 or 5 weeks to get over the injury and then get yourself match fit. So it took me time to get kind of established as such as a name at the club. But as I say, once the change in managers, and then obviously the manager style of play where he liked, bigger strikers rather than the smaller guys, it was another hurdle to go overcome. But eventually, I think, finishing wise, I showed my quality in all round general play. I showed my quality, that I could bring something to the team. But I can't remember exactly what happened. But eventually, I found myself in the team, and I think I played the last 7 or 10 games and come up with, as you said, with a few goals, which was nice to finish the season.
Fast forward to the summer of '93, Glenn Hoddle would become the Chelsea coach. What was your thoughts on Glenn coming in?
Yeah, once again, it was the same at Rangers. When Glenn came in, obviously new manager comes in with new ideas, and I think he signed Mark Steen and Paul Furlong very early, and yeah, I believe he signed them. Yeah, I think that was in the same window. So it was a case that I'd always come from Rangers where you were fighting to prove, and then all of a sudden it was another new manager. Everybody's fighting to prove, but once again there's two strikers that come in and they take your position. So it put me back into the backup spot again, playing in reserve games. But once again, I never let the kind of a belief go that I would get the opportunity. Whether that be through lack of form, lack of goals, lack of points, or somebody getting injured or whatever. I always knew that the chance would come around, and I waited for that chance. And I believe it might have been Sheffield Wednesday away, up there in the cup, where I got brought into the team and I scored in the first half, and we eventually won the game up there 2-1, I think.
Now, it wouldn't be until February of '94 where until you scored your first for Chelsea that season. Chelsea did struggle in the league that season. Most notably, they
Yeah.
were sort of in the bottom three over Christmas. In your opinion, why do you believe Chelsea were inconsistent that season?
Well, it's very hard, Keith, to be honest with you, to look back now and put my finger on it, to be honest with you. I think that, new manager came in with a totally different playing style, more of a European playing style, if I'm being honest. And maybe there was so many players that had played a different style of English football for a number of years. And at that time, maybe in the game, there was, a lack of wanting to change, whereas now there's such a big international influence on the Premier League. It's a different game completely. So, for me personally, I'd obviously played under Graham Souness at Rangers, who had played at Sampdoria in Italy. Totally different style of play from British football, but the same European football that Glenn had implemented. So I always felt the style of play really, really suited me that Glenn was trying to implement, and it was just a matter of staying healthy, staying ready. And I think the old story goes where I used to walk around the training ground screaming at the top of my lungs, "Don't come and ask me for my goals in February because I know you're going to need them." And basically, that's what happened. Eventually, the team lost form. The team was in the bottom of the league and needed something to change. And I just happened to be on form in the reserves, scoring goals. And eventually, the chance was going to come to me, and it did come.
Despite the struggles in the league, we did, however, get to the FA Cup final in 1994. Despite the result being what it was, and we won't go too much into that result. What do you remember of that day in general for you?
I've actually never ever watched the game back, Keith, because I was so disappointed with the result, so disappointed in my performance. But as they often say in football, game goals change games, and I'll never forget we had two great opportunities. Gavin smashed one off the bar, and another chance. I think I missed one as well, going through just on the left with my left foot, going in on the goalkeeper. And in the big games, still to this day goals change games. Goals change the flow of the game, the rhythm of and the tempo of the game. And I just felt that if we could have maybe have scored that goal, the result could have been different on that day. And I remember coming down the tunnel at half time, looking at the Man United players and the looks on their faces. They could tell that they never started the game well. And if we'd have just managed to have got that goal, who knows what would have happened.
Want to touch on the next season as now because it was when we got into the Cup Winners' Cup. But before we discuss that, you started the season off well. There was a game in particular against Leeds United at Elland Road where you would end up scoring two goals, including a late winner. What was your favourite away ground to play in?
Wow, favourite away ground. I'd probably go back and maybe say I'd probably say Liverpool. I,
Okay.
I like going to Anfield. I've grown up as a kid. Dalglish was my hero, obviously, and big Liverpool legend. So getting the chance to play at Anfield, I would probably say was my favourite away ground.
Now, I do want to touch on Chelsea being in the Cup Winners' Cup that season as well. Before we talk about the goal, what was European nights like back at Stamford Bridge in the 90s?
So it's a really, really bad line, mate.
Oh, hang on, right. I'll start again. As Chelsea were featured in the Cup Winners' Cup, before we talk about that particular goal, what was European nights like at
If you have
Stamford
to
Bridge?
repeat that question, it's a really bad line.
Hang on a minute. In terms, bugger. Oh,
Can't see you, Keith.
this is not good. Okay. Right. My camera's okay. Can you see me, John?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's just a bit of
Yeah, at all, mate.
you can't hear me at all. You featured for Chelsea in Europe in the Cup Winners' Cup. Before we talk about that goal in particular, what was European nights like at Stamford Bridge?
Yeah, it was a good cup run. I think was it Victoria Siskov? I think we played previous, and I missed the game through injury. Um, Obviously, we had the Bruges games. I thought playing against the European teams was very difficult. To be honest with you, it was a totally different game from playing in the English Premier League. But obviously, we had a good run. I thought we were very unfortunate not to get to the final. We come up against a Zaragoza team that was very talented and defended well at Stamford Bridge, and then punished us on the road in Spain. So, as I say, it was a good experience. I'd played a couple of times in the old European Cup with Rangers at home at Ibrox, which was excellent experience as well. But as I say, I've got nothing but fond memories in my time there, and it was a good tournament to be involved in with Chelsea.
Now, I do want to talk about that goal. What was going through your mind in the build up to it and doing that particular run? Best goal you scored?
No, I don't. I wouldn't say it was the best goal I scored. I think it was poor. poor defending, poor setup by them. If you look at the goal, it was a really important goal. It's one that probably 90% of the 99% of the Chelsea fans that I meet will always say, "What about that goal in Vienna?" So it was probably the most famous goal I scored for them. But as I say, I can always remember just my starting position was at the top of the box from defending corners, and they're obviously their last man we had brought everybody back. And then their last man came up to play a short corner, and I've come out to block it, and I'll never forget it. Even to this day, I've kind of turned my back and it's went past me, and I thought to myself, "Oh shit, I'm going to get hammered if this goes in." I'm thinking if this goes in, I'm getting pelters from the gaffer for turning my back on the ball. And the next thing is I turned, I see the ball deflecting into my path, and I take a big first touch, and I'm looking, I'm thinking, where is the defenders? And I quickly realised there's nobody there. So I then take two big touches, and I'm over the halfway line. And I kind of remember just glancing over my shoulder, and I see two or three bodies in white jerseys chasing, but I see Eddie Newton making an absolute, long busting run to catch up. And as I got, I don't know, it was three or four touches, and I'm basically on top of the box, and their keeper advances. I remember he was a big boy, and I thought to myself, you know what, rather than shoot, he kind of filled up most of the goal. He was a big lad. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to dip a shoulder and then outside the right foot and take it past him. And, luckily enough, my touch, when I dropped the shoulder, my touch was good enough just to clear his body. And I managed just to get it, an empty net and stroke it into the back of the net. But it was a fantastic feeling when the ball hit the net, even better feeling when the final whistle went, and that was the goal that took us through. So it's a great, great memory to have, because, as I say, I've got it saved on YouTube somewhere, because I don't think the goal was showed in any British television channels. So it went a kind of a mostly unnoticed, except for Chelsea fans that were there in the stadium to watch it.
Oh, it's definitely still on YouTube, all right. Absolutely. Um, During that period as well, you scored 6 goals in 4 games. Did you feel at this stage that you was, for example, part of the furniture now at Chelsea, and you was sort of looking at yourself as one of the main strikers or the main striker at Chelsea?
No, do you know what? I always felt I was always the type of player that when you had went one or two games, probably not to tell a lie, but 3 games, if I hadn't scored or I hadn't got an assist, I always felt that I was going to get dropped out the team. I don't know. It was always my mentality throughout my career that if I didn't score and you were a striker, and it was like, 2 or 3 games and you hadn't made a contribution offensively, it was almost like, oh my God, I'm going to get dropped. So I think that kind of stood me in good stead, that I never ever, I felt I was an important player for the team when I was on the pitch, but I never took my position for granted, to be honest. We always felt that I had to keep working, to stay in that team.
And when you was part of the Chelsea first team, who would you say was your best strike partner?
I think me and Stino obviously we had a good run together. I don't think it was going to continue for, years upon years. I think that at that time in the English game, playing two small guys up front, and the way the game was, most teams played back to front, and it was very physical. I don't think it was a partnership that was going to last forever, but it was certainly fun when the two were playing alongside. We had mobility. He had great pace and great sprinting ability, getting behind. My style of play was like checking long, coming short into feet and receiving when we're back to goal, linking up midfield play to the front. So I was more of an attacking number 10 as such in a 4-4-2. If you're looking at that position now, not many teams play the 4-4-2 in world football anymore, but we certainly did. But I think when Mark Hughes came in and then Ruud came in, we kind of, Glenn decided to change the formation, and I think the formation change really suited me very even more so.
I was going to touch on the signings of Mark Hughes and Ruud Gullit. It was in the summer of 1995. What was your impression at the time of these signings, and what were they like to train with at Harlington?
Well, I was a big watcher of or studier of the Italian Gazzetta channel. I can't remember, Gazzetta dello Sport, I think it was
Yes.
called. I've probably butchered the name of the TV program with James Richardson. So growing up as a kid, I watched this Channel 4 show every Saturday morning. It was fantastic. We used to watch all these European players play, the Zolas, Viallis, Ruud Gullits, and the Van Bastens of this world. And it was a great league Serie A at that time. You had the three Dutchmen at Milan, and then you had the three Germans at Inter. So for me, I was a massive studier of the game. So to get the opportunity to, when Ruud came, and obviously Mark Hughes, who was Manchester United and Wales legend, to get the opportunity, them guys coming in, then Dan Petrescu, coming in as well. You're saying, my God, the quality of footballer that the club is bringing. I really felt that my style of football with Glenn's management style and his style of play, I felt it could really benefit me. I never ever felt overawed because at Rangers, from 16, 17-year-old, I was playing with international footballers. As I say, Mark Catley, played in Monaco, played in AC Milan, and then you had Maurice Johnson that had played with, Scotland in World Cups and played with Nantes. So they were top quality footballers I had grown up around. So it felt like second nature to me, and I really felt that I could, my type of game with my technique and my, kind of a game awareness, etc. I felt that I could fit into the team and the plans going forward, no problem.
Now, for those that remember, there was a particular game that season against West Ham at Upton Park where you had a bit of a clash, so to speak, with one Julian Dix. For those that
Yeah.
don't know, describe what happened. And secondly, did he apologise away from the cameras after what happened?
Yeah, listen, the game was, I can't remember the scoreline of the game. I think it might have been 0-0 at the time. And I think we were in the bottom corner and there was like contact made from behind. And as you do as a forward, you take the opportunity to go down and win a free kick high up the pitch. And, I go down and Julian is obviously, he's came across me, he was above me, obviously, I was below him. And there's no doubt about it that he knew what he was doing. He's kind of popped his foot down. He's obviously not meant to get, cut my head open or whatever. He's just meant to give me a clip on the head. That possibly, I've done it myself. I've jumped up and, been a small forward, jumping with players, and you kind of a lead with your elbow to catch the centre back in the side of the head or whatever. So for me, it was, people made a bigger deal of it. Yeah, does it look worse? The blood was coming down the side of the head. I came off the pitch and get 6 or 7 stitches in the head wound. But I never looked at it as anything worse than it was part of the game, to be honest with you. If it happened now with all the cameras and everything everywhere, social media, it would, excuse me, Keith, it would probably be a bigger deal. But for me, it was part of the game. I got the stitches, came back on the pitch, and obviously we went and won the game. Maybe was it 3-1, maybe 3-2?
3-1 because you
Got
scored
myself
two
a couple of
goals.
goals and yeah, I got a couple of goals, which was nice that night. And as I say to you, it wasn't a big deal for me afterwards. I got a phone call maybe 2 or 3 days later. Then Julian Dix called me, and he was just like, "Listen, do apologise. I didn't mean it," and stuff like that. So, as I say to you, I felt that I was an aggressive type player on the pitch myself. Sometimes I played within the rules, sometimes I didn't. And for me, it was part and parcel of the game, to be honest with you.
And sort of looking back on that season from when I've watched the season review recently, you would come up with so important goals. We'd go to Highbury and you'd score. Against Liverpool, you'd end up scoring. We scored some very crucial goals against the likes of Nottingham Forest and Everton. How significant was Glenn's style of play in relation to how you was as a striker? Would you say, looking back, it suited you a lot having Glenn's technique or Glenn's philosophy on the game in relation to you as a striker?
Yeah, definitely. Well, being a smaller striker playing in the English Premier League at that time, um, I always wanted to play to feet. That's the way we played at Glasgow Rangers under Graham Souness because he brought like a Liverpool type style of play to Rangers, his style of management. So it was what I was brought up with as a young player coming through. So coming and playing under like David Webb's style of play or Ian Porterfield's style of play, not to be disrespectful to these guys. Everybody's got their own style of play and how they like the game to be played. It just didn't benefit my height and my stature. Being 5'6", playing long balls into me, it's not going to be beneficial. So Glenn wanted obviously to get the ball down and get the, he then changed the system to went to like a 3-4-3, and we adapted that system from the 3-5-2 into the 3-4-3. So for me, it suited me perfectly because it gave me the freedom to roam and play in the sides rather than just playing through the middle up against big centre backs that could come through you from behind. So the style of play definitely suited me.
Do you remember that infamous grey and orange away kit that Chelsea had?
Yeah, I hated that kit. I thought it was oh, I hated that kit so much. When I look back at all the jerseys, I love the blue coat, the blue Coors jersey we had, and
Hmm.
with Coors on the front. But when I left, I always remember they brought out like the yellow jersey that Zola and Vialli played in, and I loved that away kit. The yellow kit was fantastic. I really did like it. So the orange one, when I look back in pictures, oh dear me, no wonder I played so bad away from home.
Oh, you didn't play bad at all. No, it was no, that kit. It's it's quite it's a very infamous kit. Put it that way. Very very infamous kit.
Infamous. Yeah, yeah.
Later on that season, we'd end up reaching the FA Cup a semi-final. We'd play Manchester United at Villa Park. That defeat was a tough one to take for Chelsea, wasn't it? Because we did play very well. Ruud Gullit opened the scoring, but we just couldn't we just couldn't see the game out, could we?
Yeah, I remember that when Ruud scored, the like the exhilaration, the energy, and the confidence. It was almost like you know what, we're getting over this hurdle because Man United had obviously been a bit of a thorn in the side for us. And when the ball hit it, he scored from a header, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Was Ruud goal a header?
Yes.
Yeah, and I always remember thinking, you know what, this is our day. It wasn't a great pitch, but I just felt that we played we kind of matured. A lot of the younger boys at that time in the team, myself and Burley, and that felt that we really matured and we were ready to like take the next step. And always remember, I don't know what the scoring was. It could have been 1-1, we might have been 1-0 up, but we had a corner against, and I was near post. And I always remember looking to my left hand side and Canton, I was near post, and the ball came in, it get cleared, and we went on a break. And I'll never forget it. Don't know what happened in the build up, but the ball came out in the air to me, top of the 18-yard box. And I was never a great volleyer of the ball. And I hit this volley. And when you volley the ball and you hit it sweet and you know you've hit the ball comes off your foot so light because you've hit it so pure. And I'll never forget the feeling when it left my boot. I thought to myself, that's a goal. And I remember going away as if ready to celebrate. And the ball flew past Michael's hand and Cantona cleared it off the line.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, why was he there? And I couldn't understand. I was like, he run for he tracked the run, basically knew the counter attack was on, his team were in trouble. And you know what's is that the sign of the great players? I don't know, because I was never a great player myself, but they sense danger, they sense things on the park that us lesser mortals don't see. But as I say, in the game it was afterwards, I think was it Craig? I think Craig Burley might have tried to play a kind of a scissor kick back pass that was short,
Mm.
and I'm not sure if it was Beckham that went in and finished it, and they eventually ran out the game 2-1 winners. But as you said, you're sitting in that dressing room at Villa Park. I know how the fans feel on that drive home because believe me, us players felt the exact same way on the drive home.
I want to fast forward a little bit to the summer of '96. It would be quite a important one for you. You would feature for Scotland at Euro '96, and Chelsea would have a new manager in Ruud Gullit after Glenn Hoddle would leave the job to join the England national team. What was your reaction, but also the team's reaction to Glenn leaving? Because certain people have sort of got different stories about what they first heard and what happened. What was your take on the whole situation surrounding the change of manager that summer?
Well, if I'm being honest with you, I think that I remember getting into Glenn's office at Harlington and just saying to him, listen, Gaffer, is the rumours true? You're going to take the England job? And he didn't, he said yes without saying yes. And I remember I said to him, I said, please, Gaffer, don't go. Don't go. Stay here. I think that we're on to something special here. And but you can obviously look back and you say to yourself, I've been a professional assistant coach. I've been a head coach myself in Major League Soccer with the Portland Timbers. It's when your national team come calling, right? You're not going to turn the job down. So I could totally understand from Glenn's point of view that it was probably the pinnacle of English football at that time, that job. So I think that in hindsight, I think if Glenn maybe looked back in it, he might say, no, Spenny, you're wrong. I think in hindsight for the club at that time, I think it would have been better if for Glenn and Chelsea, if he would have stayed in the job and never took the England job. But you can't turn back the hands of time. Obviously, Ruud took the job over, and it was kind of at the start of my downfall. I think that the game that I played at Wembley, I didn't play particularly well, Scotland England at Wembley, and I think that was probably the start of my exit from Chelsea, because I remember when we met up with the team after the pre-season or during the pre-season down at Kingstonians for a pre-season friendly, and Ruud made reference to how poorly I played in that game. And I felt to myself afterwards leaving the stadium, I felt, you know what, he's after me, and I think my time's up at the club.
Because that summer as well, Chelsea would end up signing a certain striker called Gianluca Vialli. What was he like to play
Yeah.
alongside, both in training and in matches?
Listen, as I say, I only did it in training. Obviously, he was going back to what we spoke about earlier in the conversation, that I used to watch him playing on, Channel 4 on a Saturday morning, and he was like him and Zola, they were like idols, of Italian football, obviously. Fantastic. What a gentleman Luca was. And I think everybody says the same thing. Absolute gentleman, great footballer. And sad that we lost him, so young. To this earth. It was terrible news. I think everybody was affected by it in the Chelsea family, so it's really really sad. But I have got nothing but great things to say about him. I had the pleasure of playing training alongside him. I can't remember many games. Maybe in pre-season we played a few, but I just felt at that time that the players that was coming in, they were obviously moving guys out to bring in money to pay for the big transfer fees and salaries, etc. That was coming into the club.
In that 96-97 season, despite you scoring 2 goals in 2 matches against Blackpool in the Coca-Cola Cup, as it were, later on that season you would end up leaving Chelsea to join Queen's Park Rangers for a fee, from what I saw, was over £2 million. How did this move come about for you?
Well, I think that for me, as I say, the whole situation, evolved from almost day one at Kingstonians. I think
Right.
that when you're in life in general, and you're in a situation and an environment and whatever industry, you get a feeling for if the boss likes you or not, right? So I felt that from that kind of a dig day one, that Ruud was looking to make a change. Me and him are actually very close as players, and I always remember as 2 or 3 players saying, "Oh, Ruud's the manager, you'll get a new contract now, no problem." And it couldn't have been further from the truth. But for me, I wanted to stay at the club, but I only wanted to stay at the club if I was getting a fair crack at the whip and I was going to play, right? I loved, hopefully this doesn't come across the wrong way, I loved playing football more than I loved playing for the club, right? The same as at Rangers. I left my boyhood club that I'd been with as a kid because I loved playing football more than I loved playing for the club.
Yeah.
So for me, it didn't matter what club I was at. I loved playing for Chelsea, but if I was sitting in the stands watching the games, I was an unhappy person. So for me, I was like, I have to sacrifice. I can't say I love being here when I'm not playing. When I'm playing, I love it,
Mm.
right? And looking back on my time at the club, do I love the club? I have a fantastic time at the club. I do love the club. But at that time, it was a very unhappy time for me. So when I wasn't playing, and people were like, oh, Ruud was this type of coach. When I'm not playing, I'm a pain in the arse. right? I'm not an easy person to deal with, so I'm not going to turn around and say I've seen podcasts before with a lot of players, and they say the manager was wrong, the manager was this, the manager was that, right? And it was all the manager's fault. When you become a coach and you become a manager yourself, you have a slightly different perspective on the situation. So what I can say was, Ruud felt that I wasn't good enough to play in his team week in, week out. I have no problem with that. No problem whatsoever, because the game's all about opinions. Where I have the problem, Keith, is when people are not being kind of straightforward and honest with you, and they tell you that you're part of the plans, but you're not in the squads, etc., and you're training hard, and they tell you to keep training hard. So all I wanted was someone to say, "Hey, listen, you're not good enough to play here. We're going to move you on." And for me, when I became a coach, I found myself in this situation as well. So I could look back on the previous experiences me as a player. So when I didn't fancy a player, what I didn't do was mess him about and put him in the reserves, etc., etc. I would pull the player in, and I had this situation at Portland where I pulled a couple of players in. I was like, "Listen, I don't see you breaking into the team, right? Because I prefer this guy, and I prefer playing this system. But what I'm going to do for you is, if you want to move on, let's find a destination that will suit you as a player and suit your family, etc." And I was always honest and totally upfront with the players, right? They may not have disagreed with my decision, but they would respect me for my honesty. So that's all I ever wanted, was like, you know what? And then when I felt that the situation was becoming, I don't want to say dishonest, but people weren't being truthful, I felt it was like, you know what, that then I became very difficult to coach. And then I made I made Ruud's decision very easily, because I wouldn't say I wasn't training properly, but it was like, listen, if you're going to mess me about, I'm going to mess you about. So let's get the situation sorted for both of us, where I can move on quickly and you can then move on from me. So the situation came up that Ray Wilkins, I believe, when he was at QPR, actually set the wheels in motion at the start of the year to sign me. I didn't know this until I went to QPR, and then obviously he left QPR. Stuart Houston became the manager, and I believe the people behind the scenes said, "Listen, we've got this deal in motion. You can sanction it or not sanction it." And I think Stuart Houston was like, "Yeah, I like him. Let's bring him in." So I think it was about November time I moved on.
Because it was around about the same time as well that they signed Gavin Peacock as well from Chelsea. So that would have been sort of around about sort of like the end of no well, start of November, around about sort of the end of '96 in general. Sort of when you left Chelsea, sort of, whether it was years later or even decades later, did you end up speaking to Ruud about obviously how you felt as soon as he got in charge and things started to be different, or would you just say that that was just the way football was?
No, I think that I had a couple of opportunities where I was approached by national newspapers, and they wanted to pay me money to slaughter them, and I was like, that's just not me, I'm
Mm.
never ever going to do that, and that's why I seen him about, I think it was about 2 months later. I tell a lie, it was after the World Cup, after the FA Cup win at Wembley, where Roberto Di Matteo scored the goal very quickly against Middlesbrough. I seen him in Portugal. He was on the driving range, and I went up and I congratulated him. Wished him all the best. We had a wee quick kind of a 5 minute chat. So for me, it was like I was never a grudge holder. Even when I became a coach, players, because of the way I behaved and how hot headed I was at times, I could always respect when the shoe was on the other foot and a player would maybe say, F off on the training pitch or throw their hand up. I could always go, you know what, that was me 20 years ago. So I would always talk with the player, get them in, kind of hash the differences out, and then I would move on. It would be a race quickly. So I've got no gripes against Ruud whatsoever. At the end of the day, he had a job to do. He had an opinion, and his opinion was that I didn't fit into his. And so I'm fine with that. The thing for me is, when I meet Chelsea fans, and their opinion is that when I was at Chelsea, I worked hard. I always tried to, put in a good working shift for them for 90 minutes, and I played some good minutes for them on the pitch. And that means more to me than any manager's opinion or whatever. When the fans come up to you and say, you know what, I remember this, or you did this for us, then that makes me feel great.
I want to touch on the modern day football, and one aspect that I was so glad that was not around in the '90s that is now is VAR. I know we've had numerous former Chelsea players on the show have expressed their opinions on it. John, let's say what's your thoughts on VAR? Are you happy with it, or do you feel something needs to change? What's your opinion on the software that is VAR?
Yeah, I think I would like it just to be modified for certain things, like maybe tackles, red cards, right? An overly aggressive tackle, etc. I'm not a big lover of goals being scored and then there's that break in the celebration. I think it takes away the kind of the naturalness of the game, like that euphoric feeling. Like you see it with players, they score the goal and all of a sudden they're looking across to see if there's a flag, and then they're looking up at these screens in the stadiums now. I just think it's not authentic enough for me. And as I say, if you said to me, what could we do to make it better? I'm not so sure. I think, I watched the NFL. Obviously, we've been in America for a number of years, big follower of the NFL, and it seems to be that it's part of their game. Their game is a stop-start game. You know what I mean? It lasts for 5, 6 seconds, then it's dead, and then it's a walk, and then they move the chains, etc. So it kind of suits that sport. I think with football, it's such back and forth. The ball's in and out quickly. I don't know. I just think the delays in the game for me takes away the authenticity and that kind of a natural passion for the game. So if it disappeared for football and they went back to what we had before, I wouldn't be disappointed. But there'll be maybe people watching this and go, he's a dinosaur, because that's the easy way out. The old style, the old school. It's not about old school, it's about the game. And the game is, the passion of the game. That there's As I say, that it's very hard to put a finger on it, but there's too much breaks in the game now for me, to be honest with you, and VAR is a massive contributor to that.
And we must touch on Chelsea of 2024. It's been an interesting year to say the least, but Chelsea, it seems, are sort of turning a corner under the new manager Enzo Maresca, and there's been a number of very good players that are performing consistently well for the club now. What's been your take of Chelsea this season?
Well, it's been a different team this year, and with the same players, basically. And I think if I can just go from my time in Major League Soccer, bringing in players from different continents, different cultures, it sometimes takes players a long time to settle in. And I think what you've found is, you look at the difference with Fernandez coming in, super player, just come off winning the World Cup with Argentina, comes into a different culture, to a different climate, to a different league. And you look at the difference with Cole Palmer coming from this league, different team, but how quickly he settled compared to Hernandez, Caicedo, etc. So it's very easy to turn around and say, and it's very easy to turn around and be disrespectful to the previous managers and say, Maresca's got the best out of them. Maybe he has, right? But I just think that when you're coming from a foreign country, different language barrier, different food, some players settle a lot quicker than others, and a lot of others take time now. I think if you look at the young midfield players that were brought into the club, they've really started to gel. And I think what's happened now is they became a little bit battle hardened to the demands to the Premier League. And I think now you're seeing a different team. There's no doubt about it that Graham Potter was a good coach. Pochettino was a good coach. Maresca, they're all good coaches. You don't get to the level that these guys have been at and get to manage clubs like PSG and Chelsea, etc., if you're not a good coach. So I wouldn't like to be disrespectful to these previous coaches and just say, these guys are terrible and this guy's brilliant. I don't think that's the case. I think what you're seeing a team that was a lot of young players, and possibly too many young players brought into the club in quick succession, and a lot of disruption within the club. We never had a core group of players, did we? Because we lost a couple of the guys. We've lost Conor Gallagher, we lost Mason Mount. So there was a lot of guys shifted and moved, a lot of moving pieces. But it's nice to see that there's finally calmer waters at the club, and the players are now starting to perform at the level and the consistency level that it's going to take to make a challenge to get the club back in the top four.
Do you believe Chelsea can win something this season?
Well, I think if you look at their past performances over the last few games, I watched part of the game last night. I've seen the highlights on YouTube. I think seeing what you're seeing, as I say to you, if the players can stay consistent because they're still young, they're impact players in the team are very young. If you look at Cole Palmer, what he's doing, Madueke is starting to now chip in with goals. If I was looking at him, I'd say, right, okay, you've got the athleticism, you've got the stature, the pace, the power, you've got the trickery, the technique, but are you going to give us the end product? And now it looks like he's starting to deliver the end product. Cole Palmer, on the other hand, is jumped into this team like he's been here 15 years. He's playing like a 28-year-old player at the peak of his powers. And what is he, 21 maybe, 22? I mean, what the stuff that he's delivering is elite world level performances, what he's doing in a Chelsea jersey right now.
Finally, John.
So to answer your question, Keith, should they win something? Sorry, to answer
No,
your
no, go
question,
on.
should they
By
win
all means.
something? If they stay healthy, if they stay healthy, they've got a great chance of picking up silverware. I think they've, let's be fair, if we're looking at it right now, sitting second in the Premier League, if we don't win something this year, I think everybody connected with the club, I think, would be a bit disappointed.
Finally, John, last question from me. How do you look back on your time at Chelsea Football Club?
Fantastic memories. To put it bluntly, my two oldest kids were born in the house that I'm in now that I used to go to Stamford Bridge in. My kids were born here. They used to drive into Stamford Bridge from here as infants. My wife used to bring them to the games. So for me, it was where my family was formed, where they were born. So I've got nothing but fantastic memories of my time at the club. Fantastic.
Brilliant. John, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being part of our Christmas special. Really appreciate your time. Have a lovely Christmas, and hopefully, we'll see you back at the bridge quite soon as well.
Definitely, Keith. Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I wish everybody that supports that blue jersey, I wish them a great Christmas and a happy new year, mate.